Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to kick the tires and light the fires. F1 Brake Check is on. We're going to be discussing the latest news and rumors, plus we'll dive headfirst into the world of track safety by looking at virtual safety cars versus full safety cars and other scenarios. So check your mirrors, hit the VSC button so you can hit that delta, and stay tuned. F1 Brake Check is getting our hi-vis safety vest on.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, we're back with F1 Brake Check. As always, with me is my intrepid co-host, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing today, sir?
Oh, great. It's funny, in our industry, in IT, whenever you have a break or a vacation, when you come back, it's just full force. Last week was nothing but meetings. This week was nothing but meetings, to the point where you can't really catch up, you know? So,
Yes.
yeah, it's been an interesting couple weeks. How about you?
Very much right there with you. I know exactly what you're talking about. Is it seems like it's like you take some time off and then it's like your customers and stuff want to make up for lost time by cramming even more stuff
Exactly.
into your already loaded week. So
Yeah.
yes, very much so.
Looking forward to Friday.
Yeah,
Want to see the
absolutely.
Dallas Stars hockey game?
Yes, exactly. Corey and I are going to be attending a hockey game, doing that in real life thing for our monthly get together. So, we're looking forward to that. And Corey just had a birthday, so we're going to be getting to celebrate that together and go watch some hockey and hang out and have a good time. All right, so let's jump into our news and rumors. So first off, we've had a couple more announcements of car launch dates. So Williams have announced that on February the 5th, they're going to be coming to New York City to do their launch event for the 2024 contender. We'll be seeing them. You kind of do the glitz and glam thing in New York City. Red Bull and I believe it was Alpine or Aston Martin, who both came and did their reveals in New York City last year. With the continuing growth of the U.S. audience for Formula One, we're seeing more and more teams that are actually coming to the United States to actually do their new car launch, which I find really interesting, because in years past, it was like usually almost all of the teams, whenever they did their launch events, almost all of the English teams did their launches either in London or at Silverstone. And then you had your handful of other outfits that would do their launch events either at their factories in their home countries. You would have like Ferrari would do theirs at Maranello and would actually, run the car at the Fiorina track that is across the street from the Ferrari factory. This is kind of an interesting trend. For me, is really interesting. But from a newer Formula One fan perspective, what's your thoughts on more of the teams coming away from their factories to do these big reveals?
Yeah, I'm more traditionalist, as you know, but I would prefer them to be at Silverstone or at their factory. I don't know, that's part and parcel to getting something delivered. It should be there in their home place. Silverstone's a perfect place, especially for, Red Bull or Aston Martin, most especially for Aston Martin.
I find it interesting, but yes, I'm like you. I am somewhat of a traditionalist. I can remember back in the mid to late 90s, and into the 2000s, where, a lot of the English teams would hold their events at some hall or some venue in London, so that way it made it a little easier to have more of the motoring press show up for the events, but it was still relatively close to home. And most of the time, it was usually followed by a shakedown run the following day at Silverstone or Brands Hatch, or in the case of, like I said, Ferrari, who would have their reveal, they might have it in Rome or someplace like that, but then have the shakedown the following day at the Fiorina test track. I'm like you. I do much prefer a little less of the show aspect of it, more of, hey, here's our car, here's our driver lineup. Ask him a few questions. Here's the designer. He can talk about the car. Here's the technical director. Here's the head of engineering and things like that. It was really more about the car and less about the spectacle of it.
They're perfectly positioned to go out and do a test drive and actually show the car off a little bit more versus being in New York.
So we also got the announcement that Aston Martin would be having their reveal on February the 12th, but they are actually having theirs at Silverstone, with the assumption that they will be doing a filming day as well after the reveal. So in all likelihood, it'll be like what a number of the teams have done in years past, where they will take and reveal the car in the garage area. And then as soon as the car has been revealed and they've done the usual press conference, then they'll fire the car up and send it out for its shakedown run out on the Silverstone track. I know that there are limitations on the number of laps that they can run on the initial shakedown, but it will give them a chance to do the shakedown run, check out the car, and hopefully all goes well.
Yeah.
I can remember a couple of very famous incidents when the testing rules were much more wide open and everything, where a number of the teams would do the shakedown run at Silverstone or at a track, right after revealing the car. And I can remember a couple very famous incidents where the cars like basically either didn't run at all, or they got out on track and broke down like halfway through the first lap and stuff, so a little embarrassing and stuff, but, so.
Oh,
But
that would
in
be
this,
horrible.
yes, but in this day and age of much, much better reliability, the cars are not so fragile like they were back in the 90s and the early 2000s and everything, where they were so highly tuned and everything, and so much more fragile, both from a chassis perspective, but also from a mechanical perspective from the power units. So I don't think we have as much to worry about anymore. I'm sure it leads to a lot of anxiety from the team bosses and the mechanics and stuff like that. Pucker factor, until they get that first couple laps under their belt, you can definitely tell it's probably there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those engineers are like, oh, please God, oh, please God, oh, please God.
And it's not just the engineers from the teams themselves. You've got people from the engine supplier who are doing the same thing. Aston Martin, who are the manufacturer, but they're actually running Mercedes engines in the back of the Aston Martin. So you've also have folks from Mercedes there at the launch event. There's going to be that anxiety on their part as well. And the same thing goes for, when McLaren breaks wraps, same thing for Stake, because they're running Ferraris in the back of theirs. It can be a very anxious moment for a lot of people for those first few laps for the shakedown. But here it is. We're already on January 9th. We're less than a month away now from the first cars being revealed. Things move fast in Formula One. I remember the days when the off season usually started early to late October and everything. So usually had a longer dry spell, if you will.
Yeah.
Where you didn't have a whole lot going on as far as the teams were concerned and stuff. So especially even more so next year, that the off season gets shorter and shorter every year.
I saw a while back, maybe it was mid last week, that there's a proposal now to bring 30 races per season versus 23. And I thought 30, that's another 7 races. How are you going to do that? So what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm not a big fan of that at all.
I think that right now we are pretty much at critical mass, because some people point to like NASCAR, who run 40 plus races every year.
Wow.
But the thing is, with NASCAR, the cars are not even a fifth as complicated as a Formula One car is. So preparations on them,
they're about
horsepower wise,
they're about half.
They're getting up there. The engines in NASCAR and the cars themselves are not even remotely as complicated as they are in Formula One. So they do not take anywhere even approaching the amount of time to set up and prepare for a race weekend like a Formula One car does, because you can have 3 or 4 mechanics can take and do the entire race prep for a NASCAR, whereas you've got 12 to 15 mechanics that are taking care of a Formula One car. The other thing with NASCAR is it is a US series. They do not have near the travel logistics that Formula One has to. When you're flying literally thousands of miles between races, all we have to do is look back to the last 4 races of the season, where we had Austin, Mexico, Brazil, and Las Vegas. So 4 races. And if you throw in Abu Dhabi, we had 5 races in the span of 6 weeks. So in NASCAR, they might have 5 races in the span of 6 weeks, but they're all races that are at most 800 or 900 miles apart.
Wow.
We're not talking about having to take and literally pick up an entire motorhome and all of their infrastructure and put it on an airplane and fly it literally 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7,000 miles from Las Vegas. I think the distance from Las Vegas to Abu Dhabi was like 7,000 something miles between the two. It was widely reported the mechanics and the engineers and all of the race personnel, and even on some of the drivers, they were pretty fatigued. 5 races in a 6-week period and everything, these guys were beat. And the more tired and the more fatigued they get, the more of a safety concern it becomes. When you're that fatigued and you start running into those mental lapses and judgment and things get missed on the preparations of the car. So I think 24 races right now, I think that's pretty much the max. I don't think that for a racing series like Formula One that has such a heavy travel schedule to it, it's just not feasible.
On to the Monza track renovations.
Monza's contract with Formula One ends at the end of the 2025 season. There's been a number of improvements that the FIA and Formula One has submitted to the organizers of Monza that need to be done in order to continue their relationship with Formula One. They have started extensive renovations on the track. First of all, they are completely resurfacing the track. And when I say resurfacing, I'm not just saying that they're adding a new layer of asphalt on top of the old track surface. They are actually ripping up sometimes multiple layers of the old track and rebuilding the surface back up in order to, because one of the things that happens is as they put down more and more layers of asphalt on the track, it takes and increases the amount of quirkiness. I guess I can't think of a better term for it. So you wind up with more bumps and everything that are harder to eliminate. And so by tearing away literally layers and layers and layers of the old asphalt and building it back up, it will take and allow them to create a much more consistent and level surface all the way around the track. There's several actually quite famous bumps. There's like a very famous bump coming out of the parabolica that the drivers know to avoid, but the rookies, it's caught out a couple of them, and they have tried for years and years. And this is one of the ones that they are really focusing on trying to make sure that they eliminate those bumps and make for a much more consistent track surface. Plus, they're also going to completely redoing all of the curbs to make them much less damaging to the cars and so that they don't upset the cars, but at the same time, provide a much better level of safety. They're doing that. They're also making a number of changes from a fan perspective. Currently, a number of tunnels that run underneath the track that are used to get to the infield, that they are completely redoing those because a number of them are also used by pedestrians to walk from the outside of the track to the inside of the track to get to the grandstand seats. But right now, it's currently the spectators and pedestrians have to actually walk on the road itself. So what they're going to do is they're completely redoing all of the tunnels so that way they can actually separate the pedestrians from the vehicle traffic. So it makes it much more safer for both the vehicles and for the pedestrian. These changes are all expected to be in place and completed by the time the Grand Prix happens this season in 2024.
You mentioned there's that very famous bump at the Habalica. With the new track surface, how much is that going to change the way the drivers attack the corners, straightaways, or chicanes?
Yes, it will absolutely, because with the newer surface, once it gets rubbered in after the first couple runs out there, as the rubber builds up on the track and being new asphalt, it is going to increase the amount of grip considerably. So it will allow the drivers to take much bigger chances and be able to take and carry much more speed into the corners initially, which is going to give them more momentum, which is going to allow them to get onto the power faster, which is going to allow them to be even faster coming out of the corners. So once they're on the straightaways, I would venture a guess to say we're probably going to see an 8 to 10 kph increase in trap speeds along the straightaways.
That's significant.
If everything works out, once it's rubbered in, we should see a considerable jump, especially in straight line speed on the new tarmac.
For newer listeners or newer fans to F1, you brought up a term that I only heard of when I first started with F1, actually. You talked about once a track becomes rubberized.
Yes.
Could you talk through that a little bit more and talk about what
Sure.
that process involves in?
Okay, so first of all, we talked about tires during the Austrian Grand Prix weekend. Tires that are used in Formula One, in order to increase the level of grip on the tires, they are much, much softer than what your average road tire is. So your average road tire is designed to go 30, 40, 50,000 miles. The rubber has a hardness to it that allows it to go for those long of a distances. With Formula One tires being so much softer, they're only designed to go maybe at most 25, 30 laps, maybe 40 really hard compound tires. So as the tires wear down, rubber that comes off the tire doesn't just disappear. So it takes and gets embedded into the tarmac, especially on the racing line. And also little chunks of rubber will come off the tires and will get thrown off of the racing line. So a lot of times if you're watching a race, especially on a race that has a really high tire deg, when you look off of the racing line, you can see the amount of rubber that is off the racing line. Drivers will refer to those as marbles, because it's like they're driving on marbles. There's no traction there whatsoever. Those bits and pieces of rubber actually get ground down into the tarmac. So as the track, quote unquote, rubbers in, when you have the warm tire against the rubber that's in the asphalt, it's basically creating a much, much stronger contact patch. When you have just plain tarmac, it has a certain friction coefficient that is increased exponentially the more rubber that's embedded. When you look at the surface of tarmac, it's not completely smooth. It has hills and valleys. Well, as that rubber gets ground into those valleys, as the rubber gets pushed into the valleys, it increases the amount of contact patch. It levels out the tarmac. It also takes and starts reducing the amount of tire degradation, because again, having better contact with the surface decreases the amount of degradation. Last rumor real quick is that Ocon is possibly on Sauber's radar to take one of the seats when they become Audi in 2026. Hulkenberg's name has been floated around quite a bit as being one of the drivers that Audi is targeting for their driver lineup. But in the last few weeks, Ocon's name has been surfacing way more. And Ocon is one of those guys who's contract is end up at the end of the season that could very well see Stake sign Ocon to a contract for him to drive for Stake next year in 2025, and then become one of the drivers when Audi takes over as the full-fledged member of Formula One in 2026.
That's an interesting pairing, right? Because you would assume they would keep Bottas. I'm a fan of his anyway, but in my mind, it'd be stupid to let him go. He's just a phenomenal driver, especially given a good car. I mean, having Ocon would be an interesting pairing.
I agree that I think Bottas and Ocon would be a better pairing, but as always in Formula One, a lot of times politics plays into it, and I can definitely see Audi, being a German manufacturer, wanting to have at least one German driver. I mean, it was just like when Mercedes-Benz bought the Braun team and became full-fledged constructor and power unit supplier. Their first couple of years, their two drivers were both German drivers in Michael Schumacher and Nico Rosberg. So I can definitely see Audi wanting to have at least one German. That's part of the reason why I think Hulkenberg's name has been floated around so much.
Okay, so now on to VSCs, SCs, yellow flags, red flags, and everything.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I thought we would talk a little bit about the different quote unquote safety protocols that Formula One has at its disposal. We're going to take a scenario and we're going to say, in this particular scenario, this is what would happen. And this is what Formula One typically would do when that scenario arises. So take the Belgium Grand Prix. At Spa, at the end of the Kimmel Straight, is a quick little right, left, right complex, Les Combes. Cars are approaching 220, 225 miles per hour, 350 kph, and they come into this very quick, almost 90-degree right, 90-degree left before coming into the carousel. Driver goes off at Les Combes. Say he misjudges the braking zone or comes in too hot. Or you have two drivers that are neck and neck under DRS coming into the Les Combes corner side by side, and something happens. We're going to start with a local yellow flag situation. So say driver's coming in, he loses it going into the corner, goes off into the gravel, but he doesn't hit anything. He's able to save the car and he's able to rejoin the track. Well, in that particular case, we would have a yellow flag. They'll throw the yellow flag further down on the Kimmel Straight to say, and this lets any other drivers that are coming up behind them saying, caution, something's happened up ahead, slow down, no passing. The cars are required to slow down and they're not allowed to pass each other going through that yellow flag area. There will be a number of corners that will be all part of this yellow flag area that the drivers are not allowed to pass or drive at normal speed. The driver has gone off, but he hasn't hit anything. He's able to rejoin the track underneath his own power. But because he's going to be rejoining the track in a possibly dangerous location, this is letting the other drivers know that something has happened. They now have signboards on the side of the track that also will flash yellow to let the drivers know that there is a problem up ahead and to be alert and aware of it, because there's been many instances of drivers saying, I never saw the flag. So by having the signboards up there as well, this takes and adds an extra visual cue to the drivers to let them know, hey, something's happened up ahead. You need to be mindful of it. Slow down, no passing. The teams will actually send a signal to the cars to display on the wheel, or in the case of Williams, the display that's mounted on the bulkhead will also flash yellow to let the driver know. So the driver has no excuse to say, I didn't know what was going on. So that's a localized yellow. Now, in the case of maybe, say, the driver wasn't able to save the car, he ends up hitting the back, disables the car, but it's in a spot where they may not have a crane available or something, or track personnel have got to come out actually inside the track area to retrieve the car and remove it. Sometimes this would take and necessitate what was called a full course yellow, which means that the entire track would then be under the slow down, no passing parameters. Now, Formula One, since its introduction of a full-time safety car, hasn't really used the full course caution flag as much, since if the whole course has to be under yellow conditions, they will automatically deploy the safety car as well. Now we'll talk about the virtual safety car versus a full safety car. So say two drivers collide and they both go off track, and the marshals now have to come out on the track surface and actually remove debris from the actual track surface and not just from the side of the track. That's when the FIA can then take and deploy what they call the virtual safety car. Now, this is a relatively new thing that with the electronics and everything that have become more prevalent in Formula One, the teams are actually able to send a signal to the car to say, okay, virtual safety car, which means that the cars must slow down to 40% of what their normal speed will be. And so on the display, they will actually have a delta that they have to stay to, which means that they have to be within, I think it's within a second of this delta time. If the time to get through a certain sector of the track is 30 something seconds, then they have to reduce that to 40% of that 30 seconds. And they also, again, are not allowed to pass. But what this does is this takes and slows down all of the cars as they're circulating the track, but it still maintains the distance. Under a virtual safety car, you are allowed to pit. A lot of teams, as soon as the virtual safety car comes out, they will take and change their strategy to box the car at that point, because under green flag conditions, meaning under normal racing conditions, the average time lost in the pit can average anywhere between 20 to 30 seconds, depending upon what track they're at and the length of the pit. Under green flag conditions, you lose 20 to 25 seconds. Now, under a virtual safety car, because the cars are moving at a significantly reduced pace, this reduces the amount of time that you lose under the safety car. The full safety car is like the virtual safety car, is there to force the drivers to reduce their speed. But what happens with a full safety car is a car is actually deployed. It will pick up the leader of the race, and all of the other cars will, quote unquote, pack up behind them. A hypothetical situation: under a safety car, Max Verstappen is leading. Carlos Sainz is 12 seconds behind him. Something happens at Lacombe's. There's debris all over the track and everything. So the safety car will get deployed. The safety car will pick up Max Verstappen, and that all of a sudden that gap between Verstappen and Sainz is negated, because now the cars are literally running nose to tail while under the safety car. And then when the safety car comes off and they restart the race, Sainz is literally right on Verstappen's tail. One of the things with the safety car, though, is Dr. Ian Roberts, who is the medical director for the Formula One, also the safety car driver who since 2000 has been Bernd Maylander. They will stay strapped in the car during the entire course of the race, and they will be parked at the end of the pit lane ready for deployment. Another important aspect of the safety car is the fact that the medical team is in a position where they can take and very quickly get to the site of an accident in the event that they need to be there to render aid. Our last scenario is when a red flag will come out is in the event that the accident is so particularly damaging to the cars. Let's put it that way. Maybe you might have a 3 or 4 car accident and there is debris spread everywhere across the track, off track, in the runoff areas. And even deploying the safety car would pose too much risk to the course marshals in their efforts to take and try to clean up from the accident. Then the FIA will red flag the race, which means that all of the cars are required to stop in the pit lane in their running order. So usually what will happen is the safety car will be deployed, will pick up the leader, and then once the leader has been picked up, depending upon how bad the situation is and where on the track the accident is located, the safety car will do one lap and then bring the cars into the pit lane. And during that time, the cars that may have been lapped, the quote unquote back markers, will be allowed to take and go around the safety car, go pick back up their lap. And at the same time, the safety car will bring the remaining field into the pits. They are required to park in the pit lane. They're not allowed to go to their garages, but they're allowed to park in the pit lane in running order. And during that time, the teams can do any type of repairs or work on the cars while they're under red flag conditions. So if the car is not pitted yet, they can change the tires. If there's been damage to a particular part of the car, the teams can actually make repairs to those parts of the car. Once the accident had been cleared and the track was ready to go racing again, the safety car would deploy with the cars behind them, do 1 or 2 laps, and then come off, and then they would do a quote unquote rolling start. But in the last few years, they've changed the sporting regulations that now, unless it's deemed be unsafe, like a weather red flag, but it may still be raining, but the rain has abated to the point where it's now quote unquote safe to go racing, they'll do a rolling start in those cases. But most of the time, if it's especially in dry conditions, they'll actually do another standing start with the drivers starting from the position that they're in the race. So like if a driver was at the time of the red flag was running P3 or P4, then he will start from P3 or P4 after the red flag. Our preseason predictions last week, where I said I think that Aston Martin will get their first win, but it'll be Stroll who will be basically gifted. After all the bad luck that he's had, he'll be in just the right position to catch one of those red flags where he hasn't pitted and he's further up in the standings, and then the red flag will come out and they'll be able to take and do all of his pit work, so which means he'll get to retain that position, and that's how he'll get his first win. There you have it. There's kind of a breakdown of the different safety scenarios and the virtual safety car versus the safety car, and how the pit strategies take and play into when those different scenarios play out, and how each of them can take and have significant repercussions on pit strategies, race strategies, and race outcomes for that matter. You know, because now suddenly a back marker team that probably would have finished 12th or 13th and out of the points in a particular race can have a very big day and a large points haul just simply by a red flag coming out at the perfect opportune time for them and allowing them to significantly advance their position through intelligent strategy based around the red flag that they wouldn't have been able to do on track under normal racing conditions.
All right, man, you ready?
I think it's time to go ahead and bring this puppy home. You've been listening to F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. That's Corey Brune over there. Come back and join us next week, where we'll be talking about more news, rumors, and we'll have another exciting technical discussion about another part of Formula One. And until then, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Ta-ta.
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher. Also, help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. We value your feedback and passion, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, stay inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.